you are learning from what people tell you about your thing, the things they want to use it for. If you don't know if that code is going to live the next week when you go and learn something else about it, why would you spend too much time on it? It's way better to see it hackily made, but still see it working, because then you'll get so much more insight.
Hi everyone, I'm Jack and you're listening to Scaling DevTools, the show that investigates how DevTools go from 0 to 1. I'm joined today by Fred Schott, who is co-creator of Astro and co-founder of the Astro technology company. And Astro is a web framework that is really fast, and it's kind of built from the ground up to have like really fast blogs and content sites, and it's really taking off right now. So it's really exciting to have Fred on the call. So thanks so much for joining, Fred.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Could you tell us a bit about Astro and what you're working on?
Oh yeah, I mean, you nailed it in the intro. Astro is a web framework, so a way to build websites. We're trying to bring kind of the best of all the frameworks that are out there, specifically for the use case of building content-focused sites. So if you're building a homepage or a marketing site or a personal blog, a personal portfolio, kind of all the way up to even like an e-commerce site, Astro is designed to give you this really nice, easy-to-use experience built around server-first, HTML-focused, really focused on being easy to pick up and use, while still letting you bring your favorite framework. So it works with React, Svelte, Vue, Solid, whatever your thing is. You can kind of bring that in for the interactive UI on your page. So it's a fairly unique architecture in the web space, but ultimately its job is just to be faster than everyone else and make it easier to spin up a site, easier to use, and easier to be productive.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I'm someone that kind of came into web development when React was kind of the default choice for absolutely everything that you ever did on the internet. And it feels really interesting and exciting that you're thinking so much about like, well, is it always the right choice if you've got like a very static site? And it's really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, the last like decade, it feels like almost has been defined by these like full stack JavaScript. So like SPAs, right? This SPA single page app, like, and I've grow up isn't the right word, but I've been using React my entire web career. Like, I love React. I'm a fan of React. But it's that like architecture of like everything's React that is, I think, what we're challenging the most. So in Astro, you still use React, but like, yeah, it's not the only tool in your arsenal. It doesn't have to be like everything's, when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. Instead, we can have this kind of server first HTML rendering that's going to do the server rendering for you. And then you get to sprinkle in the React components where you need them. So instead of having to ship your whole website as a JavaScript app, you're shipping your whole page as HTML and then sprinkling in that JavaScript. So it's much more performant, and I like to think simpler. It's kind of like, it's a callback to like old school architecture, but now with like this modern twist on it. So it's like, it's so much how the old web used to work, but the last decade has been this other architecture. So it's almost like a return to those basics without sacrificing a great DX. Yeah,
maybe that's why it's caught on so much, because devs just always love to go back to the way it used to be when it was simple. And
the meme is the Scooby-Doo meme where they're like pulling the mask off the villain, and it's Astro. You pull it off, it's just like PHP. It feels a lot like that PHP. Like, I'm going to mix in the server logic with this templating logic. Like, it kind of gives you what React is now doing with server components. That's basically Astro, but built in from day one, versus something that now they're having to kind of retrofit. You can mix your server code with your template logic in a really clean way, because it was designed literally for that use case from day one.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And it has been taking off. And one of the things that I'm really curious about is, in our introduction for you, you have two titles. So you're the co-creator of Astro, and you're also the co-founder of the Astro technology company. And interestingly, when I went to kind of see, how does Astro work? How does the business work? It's really hard to find like the Astro like business from the Astro the Astro project site, and it was like very kind of cool the way that it seems like it's very much kind of separate in a sense.
Yeah, it's fairly unique. I mean, there's not a lot on the Astro Technology Company just because it's fairly new still. We're still figuring out what the best way is to build a kind of sustainable company around an open source project. But from day one, what we've been thinking about is getting that relationship right. Like Astro is an open source project. It's not owned by this company that we formed. It's not like by being an employee, you automatically get to like set the direction of the project. We've actually tried to flip that script as much as possible. All the people who created Astro with me, we all really care about open source communities, building really sustainable projects. Like we came to this project as lovers of open source, not like as a way to like make a quick buck. So from day one, it's always been that the community is kind of Astro, and Astro is an open source project, and the company exists to support that. So by joining the company, you're not automatically becoming like a full member of the community. You kind of still have to earn that. You still have to be a part of the community and kind of earn your spot there before you can, vote on proposals, make governance changes. You're actually like a more like core maintainer is someone who comes through the volunteer, the open source community. They have more kind of privileges than someone who just gets hired by the company to work on Astro. So it's a fairly unique model. I don't think anyone else is doing it at our scale right now, but it's something we all really believe in is, the company is not the project. They're very different. The company supports the project, but it's not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's really important to create that trust. And yeah, it's very exciting. And you mentioned that you're a lover of open source, and I think you've pretty much proven that. Is this the third project that's had more than 10,000 GitHub stars?
Oh, that's a great. I don't know. Definitely more than 10,000. I don't know how many projects I've built that have that, but I've been working in open source for a long time. My first job, I was lucky enough. Even in college, I had something that was like just by total luck got to the front page of Hacker News, like a total goofy project. It barely worked, but the bar was a lot lower back then. So I guess I snuck my way in on like a Sunday morning when no one was posting anything. But yeah, I've been working in open source for a long time. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for just people building whatever they want without, asking permission.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the main focus of this episode is going to be about this article that you've written about how to build open source projects and what you've learned by doing it. But before we dive into that, could you just give us a brief kind of overview of what you worked on in terms of open source before Astro?
Yeah. So I've been leading open source projects, I'd say, for the last maybe like 5 or so years. But before that, I just was always a like maintainer. Like I jumped into other people's projects. So going back to my first job ever, I was working with a web team at a company called Box. I was like a junior employee, like software engineer. Like they had a ladder. I was like years away from any sort of promotion. I was at the bottom of the ladder. I didn't have I was just excited to be in San Francisco. I was, big wide-eyed kind of engineer coming from Boston. But I pretty quickly realized that there was this like almost other world of I could like get involved with software. I was just hungry. I wanted to learn new things. And I found this open source project at the time that we were using at Box. It was called Request, which like it's, I think, deprecated at this point. It was like the top 5 NPM package. It was how you did web requests in Node at the time. So like now Axios or, just native fetch. But 10 years ago, that didn't exist. There was this request package that like everyone used. And so I pretty quickly was like fixing bugs that I was finding in my own work, and then just started to get more involved. And, it was like a classic open source project, more issues than there were people who could work on those issues. So just pretty quickly, I was kind of, like deputized, or you do enough bug fixes where someone's like, great, that's awesome. And Michael Rogers, who was running the project, who's amazing, like an old school. He was one of the people who led the Node fork back in the day, if anyone remembers that. Like he's an awesome kind of someone I look up to a ton in open source from the Node, like kind of early days. He had been running that project himself. He created it, and he was like very quick to be like, you've got time, clearly. I don't, like, go do some stuff. And so he very quickly just gave me more and more responsibility. And I was still junior. I was still making mistakes, but he kind of let me make those mistakes and gave me a platform to, just try things and make changes and actually like try out, like, what does it feel like to merge someone else's PR? And I was very lucky to find a project where someone was kind of willing to give me a shot. So super just kind of lucky to have found that, but also a ton of work involved to just kind of contribute back to this project. And Yeah, the biggest thing for me was just like, I'd be this like lowest rung employee at a company, and then I'd go home and open up my laptop, and I was shipping code to like every company that was using Node was using this package. So like that weird dichotomy, just like that always stuck in my head as like, oh, I can have a real impact here. Like I can have real responsibility here that would take me years to get anywhere else in a job. I all of a sudden I'm able to contribute at a really high level, and that was really exciting to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I feel like that is still around, right? I'm sure I saw it recently in another project. That's incredible.
Oh, it's one. Yeah, it'll never die. I'm sure it still has millions of weekly downloads, but it is like very much deprecated. Like, don't use it. Like, it's not maintained anymore.
Oh, really? Okay.
Big warning if you find it on NPM. But yeah, I mean that was like for many years that was the package on NPM.
Yeah. Wow. And where did you go from there?
It's always that like it was just always something I did in my free time. Like I was just one of those like nerds who like I like working with software, so it was both my job and my hobby, which in retrospect probably isn't super healthy. But I always just loved working on software. So for a long time, it was just the thing I did in my free time. Would try my hand at like writing blog posts about it. Like gave one or two like meetup talks, but ultimately just really loved working on open source software. So that followed me, I think, throughout my career. And then my attempts at like running projects mainly started out of the, it kind of has its path directly to Astro, but Pika was the first project that I really kind of sunk my teeth into. So Pika was this like super, just kind of like researchy, interesting, like let's throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks project focused on ESM. So if you work with JavaScript, that import export syntax, that didn't used to always be there. There was a long time where it didn't exist. And then there was a long time where we were writing it as developers, but then our tools were compiling that down to what Node would understand, which was require module.exports, like this kind of older syntax for modules that wasn't native to JavaScript. So that migration, we're kind of on the tail end of it. But for a long time, that was like this huge disconnect where there was a ton of, we were authoring a format that we never actually ran anywhere. And like the attempt that Pika was trying to kind of ask, the question I was trying to ask is like, what if we actually ran the ESM code somewhere? So built new tools that actually shipped that ESM to the browser. It unlocked a ton of cool stuff. So build tools, there was a CDN called Skypack that came out of it. Yeah, a build tool called Snowpack. It was just kind of like, I want to try a bunch of random ideas, and the things that people seem to really connect with, I'm going to see if I can invest more and more of my time in. And that's really what Snowpack and Skypack came out of.
Yeah, and Snowpack, you wrote this really great article about the things that you learned building Snowpack.
that article was like therapy for me because it was a project that ultimately didn't take off. If no one's ever used Snowpack, it's basically what Vite has become. Snowpack was like my attempt at that at the exact same time Evan Yu of the Vue team was working on that. And yeah, Evan's a monster. I mean, he just, there's a ton of lessons I learned just by watching him and like compete, quote unquote, with him, trying to build a very similar tool at this exact same time that just, if you've used Vite, that is very much what Snowpack was a bunch of years ago, but way more buggy and not as kind of mature as Vite is today. Ironically, we built Astro on top of Snowpack and then moved to Vite because they were just doing such a great job at it, and we couldn't maintain both of these. Vite, Snowpack, very similar tools, but Snowpack, didn't really ever get to where I wanted it to be, and therefore I kind of eventually had to let it go and wrote this kind of cathartic like things I learned while building Snowpack, kind of the good and the bad, and that was a very cathartic experience getting that out on paper.
Yeah, and I guess this whole episode is going to be kind of a bit about that, and plus with some updates from Astro, I imagine.
It's so funny. Before we started recording, I went and reread it, and like half of the article, I'm just trying to pitch people like, stop creating Slack communities for your open source project. Like, create a Discord server for the love of God, please. And like now, I feel like that's very much understood, but it's so funny looking back, like how many people were still like, oh, I'll create like a Slack. I'll create this like work-focused group chat for my open source project, and just completely having done that for projects before. Like, yeah, it's just so funny that is something that's really changed since I wrote that article. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that's changed in the last year or two.
Yeah, well, let's dive right into that. So why is it so bad to create a Slack channel for your open source project?
Oh, I don't even know if you're still considering it, what's funny is Slack has only become more work focused over the last couple of years. So for a while, I think they were like, maybe do we want to support this use case? And then now they're just like, I don't even think they care anymore. Like there used to be someone, if you knew a guy who knew a guy, you could get a free account for your open source project. But like that, as far as I know, is completely gone. Like you would have to pay, I think, today for it, which is a shame. But yeah, Discord is just like, there's a lot of, what I'd say I learned the most from Snowpack was just the importance of community. Like a lot of those lessons were me not taking the community as seriously as I should have. Like I just wanted to build software and I didn't realize like there was these people who were excited to use Astro or Snowpack at the time, use Snowpack. There were these people who were excited to use Snowpack, but like that's a really important part of growing a project. So Discord becomes this like really fun place where you can almost build a community where people actually want to spend some time, even if that's just like bugging you with a feature request or an issue. When you come on Slack, it's like, dear sir or madam, I have a feature request. Like it's a totally different energy than Discord, which was like built for, 12-year-old gamer kids to like, you have to moderate your community. It turns out the tools they had to build for gamer kids is actually really good for moderating your community of open source. Like the GIFs and like the memes and the emojis, like all that stuff actually contributes to having a really like fun experience using Discord versus a work experience for Slack. And then, the moderation tools are kind of the icing on top.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So that's a real good, lesson. And when you were getting started, there were quite a few lessons you had there. So there was like build for yourself first, write messy code. Your first users are essential. Could you talk a bit about like what it's like at the beginning when someone just starting off with an open source project?
Yeah. So like if you're someone who has a project that you're working on and like you get your first user, I think one of the biggest superpowers you have at that early size is when someone comes in with feedback, like you're right there. Like they're the first person who's ever talked to you. Like it's such an exciting feeling of like, oh my God, like you want this thing. You're having this problem that I had too. Like you want to solve this thing. You're looking for a tool here. That's awesome. You can take their feedback and basically as soon as they give you like, oh, I wish it did X or Y or Z, you can go and build that. Like if you're just working solo, like there's no review, there's no one to kind of run and get feedback from. Like you just are moving, so you're able at least to move so fast at that early stage. And again, if you think about like if what you're building alongside your project is a community, like what you're hearing is feedback from that community, and then you're instantly updating and like responding to that feedback. So you're building this really strong connection of like, you can make changes quickly, you can respond to feedback, you can fix bugs. For that person who's kind of taking a bet on something really early, that's probably the strongest sign that they're looking for is like, oh, I like had a bug and they fixed it in a day. Like if a large project did that, you'd be like, oh my God, why did they move so quickly? Like this isn't safe. This isn't stable. That would almost scare a larger project to move that quickly because maybe you introduced another bug with your fix. But for a small project to be responding that quickly, that's a superpower that like I miss so much when a project grows because all of a sudden there's more moving parts. There's more tests you need to worry about. Those early days, you can really move quickly and really respond to feedback quickly and get that signal of like, what is this thing? You're almost like listening to your community tell you what they want your thing to be. And then you can kind of grow it into that. Because chances are you probably didn't get it perfectly right the first time. There might be feature ideas that you hadn't thought of or use cases that you didn't personally have. But all of a sudden someone else is asking you for a thing. If you can listen to that, respond to it quickly, that's such a great signal to them. And it's also just great feedback for you to move in the direction that other people are kind of looking for solutions in.
Yeah. It's true. That makes sense. Like when someone feels like it's kind of tailored to you, this whole project in a way, that you matter. So when you talk about this, like kind of moving fast and responding to people, there was also something that you said that kind of resonated with me, that I think one of the first projects was like a kind of, you forked another project, or you at least reused a lot of code. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting point, because when I have tried to do stuff, I often feel like I shouldn't like still, I don't know, like it sounds silly, but like steal someone's stuff or like kind of, pass it off, which it just sounds unbelievable when you reflect that it's open source, but that always appeared in my head anyway. So I just wonder how you, like, I think it was a really cool way that you did it.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is that the first version of Astro, because we have our own templating language, so we have this idea of like a component that's server based versus client based. So it's not shipping JavaScript. And to build that, we basically forked the Svelte compiler. Like we wanted something that felt very Svelty. So instead of building from scratch, we could take what they built, kind of make changes, and then as we go, we could kind of, a lot less of a lift to build your own compiler versus taking one off the shelf. Yeah, I stand by that completely. I think that is very much in the spirit of open source. I think there's like really been this big push of like, you stole this from me, or I want credit. Like, this is totally out of nowhere for me as someone who's worked in this for a while. But like, all of a sudden, you have people complaining about this on Twitter, which just feels so alien to me. I think part of it is maybe people don't understand like how much that's in the spirit of open source. And then also you have people who I think maybe don't understand the importance of licensing to the same degree. So if you take someone's code and just call it your own, like that actually is pretty bad form. Like that is not a good look. It's also just not right. Like the spirit of open source is that we can share all this great code together. You can use remix my ideas, all these great things, but like give me the credit, right? Just like call out that you did this. Like the way you do that is with the MIT license. A lot of people don't know that you have to if you're going to take their code. It's there for you to borrow. You just need to bring the license along too. So have somewhere in your code base that says this code is licensed by this person. It came from this repo, like a copy paste of some legalese, and you're good to go. Like no other industry that I know has that ability to kind of, like you said, it's like steal from each other. But it's literally like the license that we all give our software. It's just this one thing you need to do so that when you don't do it, it kind of does feel like a slight. That's my best guess at where this comes from. But yeah, I think that's one of the best things you can do is take something that someone else built, make changes to it and take it in a different direction, and then give them credit. Like we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, shoulders of other people who came before us, acknowledging it, calling it out, and building something new. Like what we're all trying to do is build new things, keep improving the space for developers. Like we all have the same mission. So I think I love borrowing other people's code, giving it proper attribution, and yeah, I think you can just build great things that way.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it really goes well with the other point that you made about writing messy code, not being afraid to write messy code. And it feels like that's on this path of making something that people actually want and not dedicating your time on something that may be that no one else needs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing, this is such a tough balance for me, but like a lot of people, if anyone's like me, like I more build something because I really want to see it. And like, it's just like, I have this like, I wish I could see what that would look like. And maybe I want to use it even myself. Like I'm solving a problem that I have. Like that means there's like this kind of like drive to just build it, which means like, just build it. Like whatever that looks like, you should like, that's always the number one goal for me is like, you should be having fun working on something that's your own free software. Like if you're not having fun doing that, that's like the most important thing for me. But also I think there's this idea of like, you don't really know what the thing you're building is. I would argue until you've kind of seen it, until you've had other people try it and given you feedback. Like, I don't know how many times I refactored prematurely and built some beautiful system because I wanted to, but like ultimately then I learned something new from a user or from myself. And I then had to go and challenge some assumption. And when your code's a mess, it's kind of almost easier to do that because you can kind of refactor as you learn more about the project. But if you've built these like incredibly comprehensive and rigid systems that are, beautifully abstracted, but like you spend a lot of time on that, all of a sudden you need to change a pretty fundamental thing about how your thing works because you're so early in the process. That can take a lot more time ultimately than if you just kind of hacked it together and then later on refactored it. So I think there's this idea, this kind of, I think, bleeds into all parts of open source. Like one of the biggest learnings for me is like building something in public and building something for other people to use. Like there's a little bit of you're more of an explorer or like even like a gardener than you are like, I have a thing that I must build. Like you are learning from what people tell you about your thing, the things they want to use it for. If no one likes what you're built, like everyone, like if no one wants to use it, like that's an interesting lesson. Like there's all these things that you're going to learn through feedback. And as you even just see it kind of form, you'll start to have different ideas about what it could be. I think honoring like that and like understanding that relationship should go through all the ways that you develop that thing. Like if you don't know if that code is going to live the next week when you go and learn something else about it, why would you spend too much time on it? it's way better to see it hackily made, but still see it working, because then you'll get so much more insight. So that's a really important thing that I always follow in building open source software. Is like, if it's early, and this could even be like prototypey code at your company or at your job, or it doesn't have to be open source to take this lesson of just like, you're probably not going to know what it is until you prototype it, have people use it. So like a hacky prototype over a well thought out system any day of the week for me.
Yeah, and I think this is really cool as well, because maybe this is like slightly outside even like growing a big project or doing something useful, but just the psychology of, I often like talk myself out of something in a way, because I'm like, I'll overcomplicate it, and it might be doing something I don't really know how to do, and then I try to like architect in my head like, oh, but I need to think about this,
exactly,
and then you never end up doing it.
Yeah. Which again, if your goal is to just build something because you want to build it, and like you don't really care about other people, you don't care about like finalizing and turning into like a V1 tool, that's totally fine. Like you should understand your goal. And if your goal is just because you want to build something, that's awesome. Do whatever you want to do. Like, don't listen to advice from anyone, because it's purely for yourself. I think it's more if you like are looking to invest in something that might be long-term, that's where learning is what I would always pitch your goal to be. Like, learn more about what you're trying to build. What is this thing? That's it. That's a process. You can't really learn that overnight. You need to feel it out, learn from other people using it. It's way more of a just kind of exploration than it is a thing you can kind of brute force.
That's like kind of that makes sense. Don't know if it's like when you go on like if you cycle across the world or something, you don't really need like to train for it, because it's like you just start out and like you'll get fit along the way. And
it's funny. There's a way that this thinking kind of infects your brain also. So maybe this is just me like going way too deep down this thinking, but like you'll start like Tailwind, I think, is a really good example, where I think people are like, oh, like I hate Tailwind, you should never use Tailwind. But like someone wanting to use Tailwind is like telling you something really important. Like managing CSS in a React project kind of sucks. Like I'm ESM importing it, and then I have to manage that class name. And so that class name has to somehow map back to the component, but like class names are underscores and component names are uppercase. And okay, I'm going to like somehow just have to know that these two things are the same, but then I rename my component. How do I rename the class? Like, as someone who's worked with CSS, and like then people try and solve that with CSS and JS, but now you're adding a bunch of JavaScript to your bundle, so your performance stuff. Like when people like Tailwind, it's because like the things that they've been offered before that haven't worked for them, and there's something about Tailwind that they like. And so I think it's the wrong thing to say, well, they're wrong. And the best thing you can say is like, okay, well, why do they think that? Like, what about this is true to them? There's huge learnings in that like I think people just kind of, it's just so easy to be like, no, they're wrong. Like, I'm right. Instead, it's like, no, there's something there that they love. And you can learn a lot about the state of tooling, the state of what people are happy with and what they want to change. And where can you build a tool if you wanted to build a tool for someone to use? Like by seeing what people are doing and really listening to the things they do, no matter what they say, like there's something there that they're looking for.
Yeah, you're right. There's something there. And it's like, if there wasn't anything there, no one would use it. And they do. And it's like that. It really, that makes sense. There's like a light bulb moment to me where you're saying that, like, it's like you explore, you put stuff out there, and you can't like theorize whether it's useful or not. All you can do is like put it out there and see what people think. And if it is useful, people will use it. And
yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's really cool. And one of the other things that you spoke about is like dog fooding projects. I thought that was kind of an interesting one. Could you talk about the importance of dog fooding?
Yeah, this is really hard for me, or at least it's been hard in the past, because so there was a certain point in Snowpack's history where I was like, I like love this project. Like people are responding. This was kind of like in the Pika to Snowpack days. Like part of that transition was me being like, I think there's something here that like no one else is doing right now. Like everyone's on Webpack, and I think there's like a very different, again, this is like exactly what Vite has proven out. There's like a new world of tooling that hasn't been explored yet. So at that point, I had actually left my job because we weren't really using it at my company anyway. Like it was totally just an open source project, and I started working on it full time, like contracting on the side, full time open source otherwise, to pay the bills, and then just open source to see what this thing was and where it would take. But the problem there was like, because my company was never using it, because I was just kind of working on the tool full time, I never had a real use case for it. So all of a sudden, as I'm fixing like the basics, like I'm able to build, I know that it's not totally broken, but then someone would come in and like use it for a big use case. Like, we're going to use Snowpack at our company. I'd be like, great, let me know if you have any trouble. And like instantly they'd run into just bug after bug after bug. And that's, I was lucky to have users who wanted to give me feedback. But at a certain point, if you like file an issue, even if you're quick to fix that issue, they try it again the next day, hit a different bug. You file it, fix it, next day they hit. Like, there's only so much that people, even your best kind of users, the most willing to give you feedback, are going to put up with. So one thing I really learned from Evan here was that he instantly, like immediately started working on a project called VeetPress, which as he was building Veet, he also had this like docs site template that was kind of all you need to build a docs site that was powered by Veet. So his own docs site for Veet was also using Veet in a really like interesting way, where it was about building, like it was this fully self-sustaining loop. So he was actually using Veet in a really advanced way, versus me. I was like working on Snowpack. I'd like hack together our doc site with Snowpack, and I'd be like, great, problem solved, move on. But I was missing the huge class of bugs that show up when you start to build something bigger and more kind of, more feature complete, because I was just using a small sliver of what Snowpack would actually do in my day to day.
Yeah, and how do you think people can kind of, if they're not already kind of using it in their job or in projects, how would you suggest people approach that?
It's tough, because you basically need to find some use case out there. So it can be partnering with someone who who's using it full time. So let's say there's one person who's giving you a lot of feedback because they're using it at their work. You can like get really close to them, like ask if they're willing to jump on a call and like walk you through the code base. Ask if they're willing to give you access to their GitHub repo, so you can actually use their repo to test new changes as you work on them. Like, that's one of the best hacks. If you truly don't have any good use case, just finding some repo that you can actually play around with that's built with your tool. You'll see what kind of patterns emerge that you maybe weren't thinking of. You'll see the bugs that they run into. You can actually work on changes and then test it on the repo before you ship it out. So you're basically guaranteeing to that great user that like, hey, listen, not only am I more confident in this change now, I've actually run it on your code base. I can guarantee to you specifically that this is going to be bug free. That's a really nice hack, but ultimately it's just really hard to beat like using your own tool every day on some sort of project. So your kind of dub site for your project, even just building one of those arbitrarily, building a really powerful docs site. Again, this is me working on like a site builder, so it's really specific to like building sites. But if you're building like an analytics tool, like make sure you are the biggest user of those analytics. You're tracking everything. Or a logging tool, make sure you're logging everything. Or a database, make sure you're like working on something with a big database, even if it's really dumb, a goofy website that like lets you rank Pokemon against each other or something. As long as you're testing these tools out, you're actually getting experience using them. And yeah, the bigger the use case, the kind of more information you'll get before your users tell you what's wrong.
Yeah. And does it give you kind of a better way of prioritizing what to work on as well when you get this, like when you're dog feeding it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it helps you prioritize like, oh, this feels wrong. Like if you can actually, as a user, say, this is bad and I don't like it. Like if you feel that about the thing that you've built, like that's a really clear sign that your users are you're probably losing people who are users because they are not as well known about the thing you've built, and just more, they don't have the same emotional connection you do. So they'll be much more quick to like, all right, not for me, and leave and never tell you why. So yeah, I think it helps you prioritize like the really rough edges, or sometimes some of the really subtle, like kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of things, where you might not see those in your day to day. A thing from Snowpack was I was like so focused on this idea of like, get rid of NPM. I just want to pull my packages from like the CDN. Like it's so much cooler to do it this way. Like this is going to be so neat when this is all finally working. And meanwhile, like Snowpack was like actually really tough to use. So the people who were using it were unhappy. And me, the maintainer, was just like, no, this cool idea that I'm really excited about. Like I was totally not doing right by my users because I was just following my own prioritization. I didn't feel what it was like to use Astro. Or again, I keep saying Astro. I didn't feel what it was like to use Snowpack day to day, because I just wasn't using it in that way. I was only maintaining. I wasn't actually using it.
Yeah. It was like you were in a very different kind of world.
Yeah, totally detached. One reason I think why Astro is on my mind right now is this is actually something that even on a big project like Astro, like when we go and plan our roadmap, like even as maintainers, like we're still like, oh, this is the thing that I think we should build. And like, that's still pretty detached from our users. So only recently did we build a public roadmap, gave people tools to actually give us feedback. And then this month was the first time we actually did a full session where we pulled things off of that based on like community upvote versus based on what we thought was most important. So that's not something I would recommend to every project, especially not an early project. It's a lot of work to maintain a public roadmap, but just being really conscious to listen to your users as much as possible, whether that's one-on-one conversations, throwing a poll out on your Discord, like, hey, what should we work on next? One of the best things you can do, I love when projects do this, they like will either tweet or post in the stores or post in their Discord and say like, what's the one thing that we're doing wrong right now? Or like, what's your biggest problem using our tool? Like that takes so much guts. I don't think I've ever really had the guts to do that. We've maybe done it in Discord, but like on Twitter to just kind of bare your soul like that, like tell me what's wrong. But man, you'll get some great feedback from that.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, I feel like we could all do that.
One thing that I would say is really important, I might not even touch on this in the article, but I think it's a really, really important like undercurrent to all these things, is this idea of like scaling your effort to like on the community side of things to the size of the community. So a lot of the things I'm giving as advice, like start a roadmap, like I hear myself saying that. It's like, if you're a project with one other user, like a Discord server of 10 people, like you're getting all the feedback you need from that server. Like you should, and like you'll see other projects, like big projects, they have like a sidebar with 100 channels, one for every language, one with like an AI support bot that's answering questions. Like you'll see these really, really smart, well thought out platforms, and you'll just be like, well, here's my one server with like my general chat. Like this feels dumb. All of those projects are wishing that they could be you. Like there is so much more feedback you're getting from just one channel of everything versus once you start splitting, you start to not pay attention to some channels, you start to miss things. Like you should always be, I think, scaling your community to the number of people in it and to like the activity that you're seeing. So that's one thing where if you come into Astro today, there's so much infrastructure set up to help us run that community. If you go back in time to like a year ago or 2 years ago, it was like one channel, then it was 2 channels, then it was 5. Everyone was just a core maintainer or like a regular maintainer. Then all of a sudden we had like people, okay, I'm going to go work on docs. I'm going to go work on support. Like all of these things that we're doing today would have made 0 sense when we were early on. But sometimes there can be that kind of like imposter syndrome of like, you think you need to do that because that's what all the big players are doing. You don't need to do any of that. Like just being as like low effort on your community while still being attentive, but like you don't need to set up much infrastructure and you can just kind of grow that naturally over time. Versus feeling like, okay, if I'm going to be a big open source project, I need all of this stuff set up in my Discord. I need all of this governance. I need all of these kind of rules and automation. And you don't need any of that. That can all come naturally as you grow.
So what would you say are like the core? So you need your Discord channel, GitHub
like
repo.
Just a general chat. Like seriously, just a place for people. And like that can be a place for people to ask questions, give feedback, post like random articles that they found on Twitter. Like it can totally just be like a place for everything. You can be a project with 10,000 stars and you still have maybe like 100 people every month coming through your Discord. Like that can probably still scale to that. Like you really don't need the more of that stuff unless you're getting like, usually it's we'll have to solve a problem. Like, all right, what's the problem right now? Like the biggest problem right now is the general chat is flooded with support questions. Like it's really hard to have a conversation because someone's just going to come in and interrupt and say like, hey, I need help. Like, all right, let's move that to a new support channel. And like, you've solved that problem versus being like, I think I need a support channel because everyone else has one. It causes you to think through like, what are my biggest frustrations? What are my problems? But the result is that you then only need the things that you actually need. Maybe your project never needs a support. Maybe your GitHub issues are enough or Stack Overflow is enough. So it's not one size fits all on these things. I think I really believe in listening to the problems that kind of spin up and answering them after they become a problem versus trying to answer every problem before it happens.
Yeah. Like kind of is the same advice as the writing messy code and stuff in a sense. It's like just do the thing, don't overcomplicate it, and then worry about like refactoring your processes once it's unsustainable.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe I'm just like kind of shameless, like, yep, my code's messy, my Discord server messy, but like, I think, yeah, what you need to optimize in open source is your own time. Like you can't do everything yourself. You can't solve every problem before it happens. So I think if you give up your kind of ego, like it's okay if this problem happens, because then once that problem happens, everyone's going to understand why we made this change. That can be one of the most powerful things, especially as you grow. You might have other maintainers. You're trying to make a decision, like pushing through a change that might be controversial. It's really hard if you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist yet, because people will just be like, why? No, we're okay. We don't need to do, why are you doing this? But like, you kind of let things break a little bit in ways that aren't super harmful. Then you can say like, all right, listen, we're all staying up all night because we're getting pinged by Discord support requests all night. Let's move this into a different channel. You've seen the problem, and now you can see the solution. It saves you from having to like, pull your hair out trying to solve every problem for everyone, and lets other people in to be a part of the solution. Like, okay, you see the problem now that I'm talking about. What do you think of the solution? Maybe you have a different idea. I think it brings other people in, so you don't have to carry it all yourself.
Yeah, that's such a smart way to think of it as well. It's like that. Isn't that like in politics? Is always like never let a good crisis go to waste. At least in like a kind of smaller scale, it's like you've got an actual issue that people understand. Okay, that's why you made that change. Whereas if you're just being like, I'm just deciding to make a change when it's unneeded. Yeah. And
I mean, it's like the big meme in open source is like, it's just so much work that's like unthanked, unpaid.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's actually maybe I've just subtly kind of optimized for this because it's the only way to kind of keep your sanity in this, which is like you need to optimize for your time. Like, you can only really solve the things in front of you. And there's this idea of like a power, again, politics. I'm only now realizing this analogy. The idea of like a power vacuum. I think there's something like a community vacuum or like a problem vacuum in open source where if something is broken, the thing about open source is anyone can jump in, make changes, get involved. Like, you're almost opening up the like room for someone to actually come in and help you, because they'll see a problem, they'll say like, wow, the server's a mess, I can help. Like, I want to like answer people's questions, so like I'll start the support channel and get involved there. Like, oddly, some of the communities with the best maintainers are some of the communities where like a creator is actually kind of absent. Like, they give just enough guidance for like some maintainers to come in and like we're quick to give away the keys to the kingdom. And then like that vacuum that they left, let others kind of rise up through the community. It's this weird thing where if you try and do everything, you're actually suffocating people who want to help, versus letting a couple of problems be visible. Maybe throwing a call to action like, hey, we're having trouble with X. What do you all think? Like, you can actually kind of bring people in to fill that vacuum, fill that space, and get these awesome, benefits of being part of the community.
Yeah. True. That's really smart. And then, Fred, one more thing you mentioned was about consistency and how important that is. Could you tell us a bit about why that is important?
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things that I've had to learn is just, and again, totally depends on your goals. If you're just doing it for the fun of it, like, be as consistent or inconsistent as you want. Work for a week every night until 5 a.m. and then totally abandon the project. If that's what you want to do and that's your goal, is to just follow your kind of own intuition, that's totally fine. But if you're trying to build a community and build something that's going to last, something that was really tough for me to learn was like that consistency element is hugely important. Like, it's much better, instead of working really hard for 1 week and then not at all looking at a project for a month. Instead, if you just worked one day every week consistently, that's going to end up being like exponentially more valuable and more kind of give you a better result. Because what that means is that your community can start to see you as consistent. So, okay, I know this bug's going to be looked at. They put in a PR. It's not like a month later after they've already started doing something else. You're like, oh, by the way, here's a review on your PR. And they're like, no, I've moved on. You weren't there when I gave you this. It's like that consistency, and specifically the feeling of abandonment kind of permeates a project really, really kind of deeply. And it's very hard to get yourself out of that. It's not impossible. Like, if you have a project from a year ago that you haven't looked at, but you want to pick it back up, you're just starting from scratch usually. Like, everyone who was there is probably gone. Like, it's like you're coming into like a ghost town from, the Wild West, where like, where is everybody? Like, there's all that house is there, but like, there's no one in it. It's something that's really tough to turn around, but it's possible. But that consistency, even if the same exact total hours, but it's more regularly doled out and no one's feeling abandoned, that is hugely important. That's something that and it's tough because like open source and burnout kind of go hand in hand. A lot of people, myself, I'll just use an example. Like, I'll work really hard on something, I'll kind of get burned out on it, I'll want to reset. Like, my inclination personally is way more sprint to get something because I'm really excited about it, and then my excitement goes to something else and I kind of want to move away. But if it's something, again, that you're trying to grow for the long term, that's one of the worst things you can do, is abandon it. Your community will feel it. the quality will suffer. You aren't able to build that user base in that community if they don't see you there, building it every day or at least every week or every month, consistently.
Fred, I wondered if you've got any takeaways from this conversation that you would really like. If nothing else, what should people trying to build open source projects learn from this?
That consistency point is definitely like so easily missed. I think one thing I just love is like the idea of community and open source being seen as like part of the same thing. Like you can't really have one without the other is really, really exciting to me. That wasn't the case a couple of years ago. And I think tools like Discord are kind of responsible for that, where like any project can have a server now. That server can be fun. People can kind of show up and hang out and start to take on responsibility. And all of a sudden they feel a sense of importance and responsibility that they might not be feeling. Like why people do open source is usually not about the money. It's usually about something else that's filling. That's certainly how I found open source. So I think just being a part of your own community, being attentive to people, just showing up every day consistently. These are all things that I think are the key ingredients for building an open source project and a community on the back of it. I think then you're just listening to your users. Did you choose something to work on that other people can relate to? Are you working on something that might just be your own thing? You kind of have to flesh that out. You really can't brute force it, but those are kind of the key ingredients. Like if you bring those ingredients and then just find something that other people can resonate with and need in their life, you kind of got everything you need. At that point, you're just kind of continuing to follow the story, follow the path, pull on the threads, like find out what you need to build and what comes next. And having a community is, I think, essential now, which is just so cool to see that part of open source really grow up over the last 2 years.
Yeah, amazing. And where can people learn more about you, Fred, and about Astro?
Me personally, I'm pretty much only on Twitter. So you can find me on Twitter at Fred K SCHOTT. And Astro is on Twitter at Astro.dot, Astro.build is the Twitter handle used for the project. Astro.build, the domain, is where the project is. So if you go there, you can find out more about the project, what we're trying to do in kind of shaking up web build tooling and web frameworks. And our Discord, I think it's Astro.build/chat. We'll get you right to our Discord. Come say hi. Tell me that you've listened to this episode and that's how you found. Like you can just kind of come and show up, and there's a ton of really cool projects going on. Again, we're on the larger side. So there's docs, there's coding, there's promoting, there's just hanging out. Like everything's going on in our Discord. So definitely a great resource to check out.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining, Fred. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.